I knew if I stepped outside that door, I would never come back, but I also knew those sheep were the only family I had left. Before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. The thermometer outside Vera's window read -71 degrees Celsius. At 85 years old, she had survived 60 Yakutian winters in this wooden cabin at the edge of the world. She had buried a husband, 2 sons, and everyone she had ever called friend. The permafrost had taken them all, one by one, until only silence remained. But this morning, the silence was different. Through the frost-clouded window, Vera saw them. Her 12 snow sheep, huddled against the barn wall, their white wool barely visible against the endless white landscape. They were all that remained of the 200 her husband had raised before the cold took him 20 years ago. And surrounding them, like a living shadow spreading across the snow, were the wolves, hundreds of them, maybe 1,000. Vera's wrinkled hands trembled as she gripped the windowsill. She had heard stories of the great packs that formed during the coldest winters, when the rivers froze solid and the caribou disappeared into the southern forests. Desperate, starving wolves that moved like a single organism, consuming everything in their path. But she had never seen it with her own eyes, until now. The sheep were going to die, in minutes, maybe less. The wolves were already tightening the circle, their yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. Vera could hear their low growls even through the thick cabin walls, a sound like distant thunder rolling across the frozen earth. She looked at the rifle hanging above the door. 6 bullets. 6 bullets against 1,000 wolves. It would be suicide to go out there. But those 12 sheep, they knew her voice. They came when she called. Every morning for 20 years, she had fed them, cared for them, talked to them like the children she no longer had. They were the reason she woke up, the reason she kept the fire burning, the reason she was still alive. Vera closed her eyes and made the choice that should have killed her. The cold hit her like a physical blow. At -71, the air itself becomes a weapon. It sears the lungs, freezes tears before they can fall, turns exposed skin to ice in seconds. Vera wrapped her face in the thick wool scarf her husband had made 40 years ago, pulled her fur coat tight, and stepped into the killing cold. The wolves saw her immediately. A ripple went through the pack, hundreds of heads turning as one. The growling stopped. For a moment, everything was silent except for the wind whistling across the empty tundra. Then the biggest wolf, a gray beast the size of a small bear, took 3 steps toward her. Vera raised the rifle to her shoulder. Her hands were already numb, even through the thick gloves. She could barely feel the trigger. "Get back!" she screamed, her voice cracking through the frozen air. The wolf stopped, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it sat down in the snow and stared at her with eyes that looked almost intelligent, almost human. The other wolves followed its lead, hundreds of them settling into the snow, watching, waiting. They weren't attacking. Why weren't they attacking? Vera's mind raced. In 60 years in Yakutia, she thought she understood wolves. They were predictable, driven by hunger and fear. But this was different. This was organized, calculated. The sheep huddled against the barn behind her, bleating softly. They recognized her presence, felt safer with her there. But Vera knew the truth. She had only delayed the inevitable. The moment she went back inside, the wolves would finish what they came for. She couldn't stay out here forever. Already she could feel the cold seeping through her coat, numbing her legs, slowing her thoughts. 10 minutes in this temperature would kill her, maybe less. But then she saw something that changed everything. Behind the gray wolf, barely visible against the snow, was a small white shape. A wolf pup, no more than a few months old, lying on its side, not moving. And suddenly Vera understood. These wolves weren't here to hunt. They were here to survive. Vera lowered the rifle slowly. The gray wolf's ears perked up, its eyes locked on her every movement. She could see it more clearly now. Its ribs were showing through its thick winter coat. Its paws were cracked and bleeding from walking across the frozen ground. This wasn't a healthy pack of hunters. This was a dying pack of refugees. Something had driven them here, something terrible. Vera looked back at her sheep, then at the wolves, then at the small cabin behind her. She had enough food stored for herself to last until spring. Dried fish, smoked meat, grain, potatoes buried in the permafrost cellar. Enough for one old woman. Not enough for 1,000 wolves. But maybe enough for something else. She made her second impossible choice of the day. Vera walked past the wolves, moving slowly, deliberately. The pack watched her, but didn't move. She reached the barn door and pulled it open, the frozen hinges screaming in protest. The sheep scattered nervously, but she spoke to them in the soft, calm voice she had used for 20 years. "It's all right, my love. It's all right." Inside the barn, stacked against the far wall, were 12 bales of hay, her winter feed for the sheep. She grabbed one, feeling her old back protest, and dragged it outside. The wolves tensed. Vera dropped the hay bale in the snow halfway between the cabin and the pack. Then she pulled out her knife and cut the binding. The hay spread across the white ground, golden and fresh. The wolves didn't move. She looked at the gray wolf and spoke, not knowing if it could understand, but needing to say it anyway. "I know you're not here for meat. You're here because there's nothing left out there. Something drove you from your territory, fire maybe, or men, I don't know. But if you kill my sheep, we all die. You understand? Without them, I have no wool, no milk, no reason to keep living. And you'll still be starving tomorrow." The gray wolf tilted its head. Vera pointed at the hay. "But if you take this and you leave the sheep alive, maybe we all make it to spring." She turned her back on 1,000 wolves and walked to the cabin. It was the longest 30 steps of her life. Every second she expected to hear the rush of paws, feel teeth sinking into her neck. But she didn't run. She didn't look back. She just walked, steady and slow, until her hand touched the cabin door. Only then did she turn around. The gray wolf was eating the hay. That night, Vera didn't sleep. She sat by the window with the rifle across her lap, watching the wolves. They had settled in a wide circle around her property, creating a living barrier between her cabin and the rest of the frozen world. Some ate the hay she had provided. Others slept, their bodies pressed together for warmth. The sheep were still alive, but somehow that felt like victory. But Vera knew this was only the beginning. She had 11 more bales of hay in the barn, 11 days if she rationed carefully. And then what? The wolves would still be here, the cold would still be here, and she would be out of options. Through the frosted glass, Vera watched the small white shape she had seen earlier. It was moving now, stumbling through the snow on unsteady legs, following the gray wolf. Its mother, Vera realized. The pack leader was a mother trying to keep her baby alive. Something twisted in Vera's chest, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She thought of her own sons, Mikhail, who had died in a mining accident when he was just 23, Alexei, who had frozen to death trying to reach the village during a storm 15 years ago. She had held them both as babies, just like that wolf was protecting her pup. Motherhood didn't care about species. Vera stood up slowly, her joints aching. She walked to the storage room and looked at her supplies. If she was careful, if she rationed everything, she might have enough food for herself until spring. But if she fed the wolves too, she would starve. It was simple math, cruel but simple. Yet as she looked out at the pack, at the mother wolf curled around her pup, Vera felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since her husband died. A sense of purpose beyond mere survival. She made her second impossible choice of the day. For 3 days, Vera fed the wolves. 1 bale of hay each morning, cut and spread across the snow. The pack waited for her now, recognizing the pattern. They kept their distance, but they no longer saw her as a threat. Some even wagged their tails when she emerged from the cabin. The temperature dropped to -75 degrees. Vera's food supplies dwindled. She cut her own meals in half, then in half again. Her body grew weaker, her movements slower. But the sheep were still alive, and somehow that felt like victory. On the fourth morning, she found a dead Arctic hare on her doorstep. It was fresh, killed within the hour, placed carefully on the wooden planks as if it were an offering. Vera looked out at the wolves. The gray wolf was sitting at the edge of the pack, watching her. When their eyes met, the wolf dipped her head slightly. A gift. For the hay. Vera felt tears freeze on her cheeks. She took the hare inside, skinned it with shaking hands, and made the first real meal she'd had in days. The meat was tough, but nourishing. It would keep her alive a little longer. The next morning, there were 2 hares. Then a small seal dragged across miles of ice. Then part of a caribou, too large for the wolves to finish. They were hunting for her, providing for her, the way she was providing for them. A partnership was forming in the frozen wasteland, not between human and pet, but between survivors who needed each other to make it through the darkness. But on the 7th day, everything changed. Vera woke to the sound of gunshots. 3 snowmobiles appeared on the horizon, moving fast across the tundra. Hunters, probably from the village 70 miles south, tracking the wolf pack. Vera's heart seized in her chest. She knew what would happen. Hunters saw wolves as vermin, as threats. They would slaughter the entire pack without hesitation. She grabbed her coat and stumbled outside, waving her arms. "Stop! Stop!" But the snowmobiles were too far away, the engines too loud. The hunters had already spotted the wolves and were raising their rifles. The great gray wolf looked at Vera, then at the approaching hunters. For a moment, Vera thought the pack would run, scatter into the wilderness. Instead, the gray wolf did something extraordinary. She moved between the hunters and Vera's cabin, between the guns and the sheep. The entire pack followed, forming a living shield. They were protecting her. The first shot rang out. A wolf yelped and fell. Then another shot, another wolf down. "No!" Vera screamed, but her voice was lost in the wind. She did the only thing she could think of. She ran. At 85 years old, with frozen joints and weakened muscles, Vera ran across the snow toward the hunters, placing herself between the guns and the wolves. She spread her arms wide, making herself as large as possible. The shooting stopped. The lead hunter pulled off his goggles, staring at her in disbelief. "Grandmother, get out of the way! Those wolves are dangerous!" "They're with me!" Vera shouted back, her voice cracking. "They're mine!" "You're crazy! They'll kill you!" "They've had a week to kill me!" Vera's eyes blazed with a fury that made the hunters step back. "They brought me food. They protected my sheep. And if you hurt one more of them, you'll have to shoot me first." The hunters looked at each other, uncertain. An 85-year-old woman defending a pack of wolves in -70-degree cold. It was madness, but it was also something else. The second hunter, younger than the others, lowered his rifle. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the old ways, before the Soviet times, when people and wolves lived in balance. I thought they were just fairy tales." "This is no fairy tale," Vera said quietly. "This is survival, for all of us." The lead hunter studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at the wolves, at the way they stood protectively around the old woman and her sheep, at the great gray wolf who watched him with intelligent eyes. He lowered his rifle. "You're either the bravest woman in Yakutia or the craziest, maybe both." He turned to the other hunters. "Let's go. There's nothing to hunt here." As the snowmobiles disappeared back toward the horizon, Vera collapsed in the snow. Her heart was racing, her body trembling from adrenaline and cold. The great gray wolf approached slowly and sat beside her, close enough that Vera could feel the warmth radiating from her thick fur. For the first time in 20 years, Vera wasn't alone. The partnership deepened as winter dragged on. Vera taught the wolves to take hay rations in an orderly way, preventing fights. The wolves taught her where to find ice that could be melted for clean water, saving her dangerous trips to the frozen river. The mother wolf brought her pup to the cabin door, and Vera fed it scraps of fish, watching it grow stronger each day. She named the pup Sonse, sunshine, because even in the darkest winter, it reminded her that light existed. The temperature remained brutal, -70, -80 on the worst days, days when the air itself seemed to crack and shatter. But Vera's cabin became a hub of unlikely warmth. The wolves slept in shifts around the property, their bodies blocking the worst of the wind. In return, Vera shared what little food she had, stretching her supplies thinner and thinner. She grew weaker. Her clothes hung loose on her frame. Some mornings she could barely stand, but she refused to give up. One night, during the worst storm of the season, Vera's fire went out. The wood was too cold, too damp to catch. Her fingers were too numb to strike the matches properly. She tried for an hour, feeling the deadly cold seeping into the cabin, knowing that without heat she would be dead by morning. Then she heard scratching at the door. When she opened it, 5 wolves pushed inside, crowding into the small cabin. They lay down around her, pressing their warm bodies against hers, sharing their heat. The great gray wolf rested her head on Vera's lap and looked up with eyes that seemed to say, "We take care of our pack." Vera wrapped her arms around the wolf and cried, not from sadness, but from gratitude, from the overwhelming realization that love could exist in the most unexpected forms. They slept that way through the storm, woman and wolves surviving together. Spring came slowly to Yakutia. First, the temperature rose to -60, then -50. The sun stayed in the sky a little longer each day. Ice began to crack in the distance, the sound like thunder rolling across the tundra. The wolves grew restless. Vera could see it in the way they paced, the way they looked toward the horizon. The caribou would be returning soon, moving north for the summer. The pack needed to follow, to hunt, to live the way wolves were meant to live. They had stayed far longer than they should have, and Vera knew why. They were waiting for her permission to leave. On the first day that the temperature rose above -40, Vera walked outside and found the entire pack gathered in front of her cabin. The great gray wolf sat at the front, with Sonse beside her. The pup was nearly full grown now, strong and healthy. Vera knelt in the snow, her old knees protesting, and looked into the gray wolf's eyes. "I know. You have to go. The caribou are coming. You need to hunt, to feed your pack properly. I understand." The wolf didn't move. Vera reached out and placed her hand on the wolf's head, feeling the thick fur beneath her fingers. "Thank you for everything, for teaching an old woman that she's not alone in this world, for reminding me what family really means." She stood up slowly and walked back to her cabin. At the door, she turned around one last time. The wolves were still there, watching her. Then the gray wolf stood, tilted her head back, and howled. It was a sound unlike any Vera had ever heard, not threatening, not mournful. It sounded almost like goodbye. One by one, the other wolves joined in, until 1,000 voices echoed across the tundra. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared months ago, the pack turned and ran toward the horizon. Vera watched until they were just dark specks against the white landscape. Then she went inside her cabin and wept. The sheep were still alive. She was still alive. They had all survived the worst winter in memory. But the cabin felt so empty now.
Vera spent the summer tending her sheep, rebuilding her strength. The village hunters came by occasionally, bringing supplies and asking about the crazy grandmother who befriended wolves. Vera told them the story, and they listened with wide eyes, half believing, half convinced she had lost her mind in the cold. She didn't care what they thought. She knew what she had lived through. She knew what was real. As autumn approached and the days grew shorter, Vera prepared for another winter. She gathered hay, stored food, and reinforced the barn. She was 86 now, older and more fragile, but also somehow stronger. The winter with the wolves had changed her in ways she couldn't quite explain. She no longer feared death. She no longer feared loneliness. She had learned that survival wasn't about lasting until spring. It was about finding reasons to want to. On the first day of winter, when the temperature dropped back below freezing, Vera heard howling in the distance. Her heart leaped. She ran outside, moving faster than she had in months, and there they were, at the edge of her property, silhouetted against the setting sun. Not 1,000 wolves this time, just 7. The great gray wolf, Sonse, fully grown now, and 5 others. A family. They had come back. Vera dropped to her knees in the snow, sobbing with joy. The wolves approached slowly, cautiously, until the gray wolf was close enough to touch. Vera wrapped her arms around the wolf's neck and held on tight. "You came back," she whispered. "You came back." Sonse bounded forward, nearly knocking Vera over with enthusiasm, licking her face like an overgrown puppy. The other wolves circled them, tails wagging. They weren't here to survive this time. They were here because this was home. That winter was easier than the last. The small pack helped Vera hunt, protected the sheep from other predators, and kept her company through the long, dark months. She fed them what she could, and they provided meat in return. It was a true partnership now, built on trust and mutual respect. On the coldest night, when the temperature dropped to -78, Vera sat by the fire with all 7 wolves crowded into her tiny cabin. Sonse's head rested on her lap, the gray wolf slept by her feet, and the others sprawled across the floor like enormous dogs. Vera looked around at her unlikely family and smiled. She had spent 20 years alone, believing she had nothing left to live for, but she had been wrong. Love didn't die just because people did. It transformed, evolved, found new shapes and new forms. Sometimes it looked like 12 sheep that depended on you. Sometimes it looked like a pack of wolves who chose to stay. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it looked like both. Vera lived to be 93 years old. The wolves stayed with her until the end, their pack growing over the years as new pups were born. The sheep thrived under their protection, and Vera's tiny homestead became known throughout Yakutia as a place of impossible harmony. Scientists came to study it, filmmakers came to document it, but Vera never let them get too close. This wasn't a spectacle or an experiment, it was just a family taking care of each other. When Vera finally passed, peacefully in her sleep during a mild winter night, the wolves howled for 3 days straight. The sound carried across the tundra for miles, a funeral song for a woman who had taught humans could be more than hunters. They could be friends. The great gray wolf, old herself now, stayed by Vera's cabin for another month before finally leading the pack back into the wilderness. But every winter after that, travelers reported seeing wolves near the abandoned homestead, sleeping on the porch, protecting sheep that still grazed in the barn. Some said it was different wolves just passing through, but the elders in the village knew better. Some bonds don't break just because someone dies. Some families last forever. And on the coldest nights in Yakutia, when the temperature dropped below -70 and the wind howls across the frozen earth, people swear they can still hear an old woman's voice calling her sheep home, and the wolves answering back.